Welcome back, everyone. I'm back to tickle y'all's ears with some new encounters. You guys seem to enjoy the longer episodes that include multiple encounters, so that's what we're doing tonight as well. I hope everyone has had a good week so far, and I pray you all are safe and happy wherever you may be on this planet. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join me and listen to these people's terrifying stories. Now let's go ahead and get into tonight's encounters. Grab a drink, lock your doors and windows, hit the lights, and let's get started. Tonight's first encounter. It's funny how you spend your entire life somewhere and think you know it. I've lived in Oshkosh, Wisconsin for over 50 years. This place, this town, it is my home. But I'm going to tell you a story about what happened to me on Lake Winnebago in February of 2009. That day, I realized there are unknown things out there that in my opinion are not meant to cross paths with human beings. But unfortunately, it seems as though sometimes our paths cross the same path as the beasts. That's exactly what happened to me. Now, fishing has always been my escape. My wife passed away in 2005, and my kids were all grown up and had families of their own. So the lake pretty much became a sanctuary. I'd go out there to think, to clear my head, and to find peace. That February was no different. I packed up my old Dodge Ram, tossed in my auger, rods, bait, and my ice shanty, and I headed out to Lake Winnebago early that morning. If you've never been there, the lake is massive. It's over 130,000 acres of frozen water stretching between Fond du Lac and the Fox Cities. It freezes thick in the winter. Sometimes the ice is more than a foot thick. Locals can even drive their trucks on it, set up their shanty, and spend hours fishing for walleye, perch, and white bass. That day it was blistering cold, and the forecast was calling for snow flurries later that evening, but I didn't care. I drove out from the Oshkosh side following the ice road carved by weeks of traffic. The shoreline fell away behind me, and soon it was just me, the truck, and a few scattered shanties in the distance. I picked a quiet spot near Asylum Bay, about a half-mile from shore, and set up. I unfolded my shanty and drilled 2 holes in the ice. I could hear the sound of my auger echoing across the entire lake. When you're on a frozen lake, sound travels a great distance, even more so than it does over open water. Anyway, the day passed relatively quiet and peaceful. I caught a couple of small perch, but nothing worth writing home about. Around 4:30 p.m., most of the other fishermen had started heading back to shore, their trucks and ATVs rumbling faintly in the distance. By the time the sun had set, I was completely alone. Looking back, I wish I would have left then, but I told myself I'd stay another hour. The fish might start biting after dark. The first sign of any trouble came just as I was pouring coffee from my thermos. I heard this long, drawn-out howl that seemed to rise and fall on the wind. I stopped mid-pour, trying my best to listen and pinpoint which direction it was coming from. And most of all, I was trying to figure out what the hell it was. Now, coyotes are pretty thick in the area, so it was a possibility, especially near the bay. This sound, though, was a lot deeper and lower than what a coyote could produce. It did, although, remind me of a wolf, only if it weighed 500 pounds, maybe. I've never heard any animal make a sound that was that powerful and loud before. At the time, one word came to mind, and that word was menacing. I kept hearing the howl every 30 to 45 seconds. Each time it seemed to be getting closer or louder, which I couldn't really tell, but I soon found out. I set my thermos down and got my flashlight and stepped out of the shanty. The snow flurries had set in, so it was snowing pretty good, making it a bit difficult to see, especially now that it was dark. The lake stretched out like a giant black void all around me. I felt like a worm on a hook myself, sitting out there in the middle of the lake, on the ice, holding a flashlight in the middle of the night. Anything out there in the trees on the shorelines would be able to see me from a mile away. That was a thought that I wasn't very happy about. The wind had begun to pick up as well, which did not help with the visibility at all. It was snowing so heavily I was nearly blinded. I could only see a few feet in front of me. I decided in the end to just ignore it best I could and go back inside my shanty. I cranked up my propane heater, watching it cast that orange glow on the walls that somewhat made me feel a bit safer. I'm not sure why, but it did at the time. I tried to just focus on my line, but in my mind I kept hearing that over and over, just wondering what was out there. What makes a sound like that? The howl disappeared and I hadn't heard any unusual sounds for quite some time. I had settled my mind and began fishing again. I had nearly forgotten about the howl altogether when I began to hear the crunch of footsteps on snow-covered ice. I heard my chair pop as my hand gripped the edge of it. These footsteps were heavy. It sounded like a person walking toward me on the ice. The walls of my shanty were very thin. I could hear every single step, every crunch of snow underfoot. I called out with my voice cracking and said hello. I didn't receive a reply, but the footsteps stopped just outside as soon as I yelled. My heart was in my throat, and I reached for the knife that was in my coat pocket. It was a small folding knife I carried out of habit, my hand shaking wildly as I held on to it. Intently listening, waiting to hear any sign of movement outside. Whatever or whoever was out there, I just wanted to know where they were. That's when they decided to up the ante. It started on the side of the shanty, a long scrape that sounded like someone dragging a knife blade on the outside of the wall. The sound moved around the walls, pushing, pressing in now and then, almost like they were testing the thickness of the walls. I wanted to yell and scream, throw out a bunch of threats, but when I opened my mouth, no sounds would come out. I was just too scared. I just kept going through all the possibilities in my head of what this could be. It's not a bear. Bears were hibernating at that time. Prank? Maybe, but who in their right mind would be out there? There was a small crack in one of the walls, and I aimed my flashlight toward the sounds and was trying to peek through. At first, all I saw was just darkness, and out of nowhere, 2 glowing yellow eyes appeared in the crack, staring back at me. I jumped back so hard that I completely flipped over backwards in my chair and dropped my flashlight. I quickly got back to my feet and got my light and shined it back on the crack. This thing hadn't moved, it was still staring. I could see that its face was similar, almost identical actually, to a wolf. I couldn't see its ears to tell if they were pointed at the time, but I could see it had a long muzzle and those yellow eyes. Its breath was coming through the crack in visible puffs. I've never seen an animal with eyes like that. I had one small window in my shanty, and this thing moved away from the crack, and I could hear it walking. It stopped right outside the window, and that's when I could fully see what I was up against. Now I could see those pointed canine ears. This thing was covered in black fur. The fur was pretty short and wiry. I was completely crouched down at this point in the farthest corner away from the window, looking up at this thing. It growled and showed me its mouthful of giant teeth. I could feel the vibrations from the growl on the ice underneath me. These creatures are huge, at least this one was. When you hear someone's story and they tell you how big these things are, you truly cannot imagine the sheer size of one of these things. It's so big that it doesn't even look real. It was towering outside my shanty. It had now moved into a full upright position on two legs. Even with its hunched posture, it had to be at least 6.5 to 7 foot tall. It quickly disappeared back into the dark. I couldn't see it, and I couldn't hear any more footsteps. This is easily the scariest moment that I can remember from my entire life. I had no idea where it was or if it was still out there. The door began to rattle, and I instantly knew with horrifying clarity that it was trying to get inside. I knew I had to make a move now, or I was about to lose my life in the most painful situation possible. I had to have gotten a good dose of adrenaline because I grabbed the flashlight and my truck keys, and I charged at the door, ramming it open. I felt the door make contact, and I heard this thing let out a grunt, but I did not stop. I know that sounds like a dumb thing to do, but I didn't really have a choice. I knew I either had to try to fight and make it to the truck, or that thing was going to take me out on the spot. The wind was freezing, and it hit me like a brick wall. All I could hear was the eyes cracking and groaning beneath my boots as I ran toward my truck. I was over halfway, and I started hearing the sounds of claws scraping on ice behind me, accompanied by heavy breathing and huffing. That's when I knew that it was definitely in hot pursuit. The truck was only about 100 yards away, but it felt like it was 100 miles. I just had a bad feeling that I wasn't going to make it. Every step, I expected to feel its claws digging into my back, but by some miracle I did finally make it back to the truck. As soon as I started it and turned on the headlights, the thing was standing right there in front of me. It's like it knew what it was doing. It let me get to my truck. I didn't outrun this thing. I didn't outsmart it. Everything that happened was because it allowed it to happen. It was standing, I would say maybe 20 feet in front of my truck, fully illuminated by the headlights. And the description you hear of Dogman's hands looking like a raccoon's, well, that's about as close of a description as you can get to what its hands look like. After staring for a few seconds, it just bent at the knees and vaulted. It jumped from 20 to 30 feet away and landed directly in front of my truck, slamming both hands down on my hood. It leaned forward, putting its face as close to my windshield as it could get. I couldn't move. I wanted to drop the truck in gear and run over it, but I just couldn't move. I couldn't do anything except stare at it. It raised both hands and slammed them on my hood again and made a menacing, horrible growl. After that, it stood up, looked at me one last time, turned around, and ran back into the woods. I sit there for, well, I'm not sure how long, a few minutes at least, just in complete shock. My vision started getting blurry, and I was very close to losing consciousness. And that's when I realized that I had been holding my breath the entire time, and I was about to pass out. I wasn't even breathing, and I was so scared that I didn't realize it. If that's not fear, then tell me what is. It never returned, and I finally calmed down enough to drive myself back home. To this day, I wrestle with what I encountered out there on the ice that night. A few days later, I went back to the lake out of morbid curiosity and to see if my shanty was still there. It was, but every single wall on it had been covered in claw marks, deep scratches that had not been there before. I haven't been ice fishing since that day, and I hope one day before I'm dead and gone that I can actually enjoy nature just a couple more times. But it's hard to forget when you meet the devil himself. Thanks for reading my story. Gary. Tonight's second encounter. I'm just going to be anonymous for the story, if you don't mind. I had my friend with me at the time, and I'll refer to him as Sam. And all of this is going to sound insane, but I swear, it all happened. I never believed in anything weird before, but after this, my life changed forever. I'm not sure what to believe anymore. I'm not sure what's real or what's not real. Who to believe, who not to believe. Now everything is confusing and I stay paranoid all of the time. The story takes place in 2008. I was 17 years old. My friend Sam and I went camping in the woods near this old run-down trail just outside of our hometown in eastern Kentucky. We had heard all kinds of rumors for years about something the locals called the Whistler. It's a legend people talked about around campfires or in passing, but no one took it seriously at all. The story was that some guy back in the 1800s went crazy and started unaliving people out in the woods. And before they would pass, he would whistle like a soft, eerie tune. Everyone says that the Whistler still haunts the forest, and if you hear him, you're never supposed to go looking for him. You're told to run in the other direction. But you know how a couple of 17-year-old boys are. We didn't believe the story at all. We only believed in things we could see and touch. It turns out the Whistler doesn't haunt the woods, but something much worse was out there waiting for us. We just didn't know it at the time. We got to our campsite sometime in the late afternoon, and the spot was perfect. Secluded just how we liked it. There wasn't another person anywhere around, and we figured we'd just go ahead and set up our tents, get a fire going, and just hang out for a little while. But when it started to get dark, the whole vibe in the area started to feel off. There's something about being in the woods at night that changes the feeling and the vibe completely. Everything just feels different at night. Just a simple sound of a small animal rustling around in the leaves can scare you half to death if you're not used to being out there. We were sitting around the fire just talking when we heard something that sounded like the wind or an animal in the trees. But then I heard something else. It sounded like a low, soft whistle. Sam, if he had heard that noise. I asked him if he'd heard that noise. He looked around at me, his face drained of all the blood. And he said, yeah, he had heard it too. And he thought it was just me messing around trying to scare him. I finally convinced him that I wasn't doing it, that it came from the trees. Right then we both stood up, but we couldn't see anything. It was too dark. The whistle came again, and it was within 50 feet of where we were standing this time. Way too close for comfort. It was coming from right at the edge of our campsite. That's not the kind of sound you'd expect to hear when out camping. Animals don't whistle, and That sure as hell wasn't the wind. It was almost like a person trying to get your attention. That's what it sounded like to me. But there was clearly no other people in the area. I don't know why, but for some reason I felt this chill run down my spine. I'm the kind of guy who just shakes things off, but that whistle was something different. It wasn't supposed to be there. Sam was already reaching for his flashlight, suggesting we go check it out. I couldn't believe it and asked him if he was serious. He laughed at me and asked me if I was scared. I told him I wasn't scared, I just felt like something was terribly wrong. And I also told him we should not go looking for the source of that sound. Nothing felt right about any of this. He thought it was probably some other dude out there hiking or hunting. But what kind of psycho hikes or hunts at night without a flashlight? He did come up with a pretty solid reason why we should go look for the source. He said I'm not going to sit here all night wondering what the hell that sound was. He had a point. I could not disagree. I honestly didn't want to go, but he wasn't having it any other way, and he was already heading towards the sound, and I didn't want to look like a coward, and I did not want him to go alone, so I followed him. He walked into the woods, and the deeper we went, the louder the whistle got. I felt like it was calling to us, drawing us further into the woods. Every time we would hear it, it was always just a little bit out of our reach, like whoever or whatever was making it was moving, keeping just far enough ahead to keep the sound alive, but completely out of sight. Then we heard it again, a loud, clear whistle. It was extremely too close for me this time. I immediately stopped and said Sam's name. He turned around and I could see that his face had gone from curious to serious. I told him I didn't think this was a good idea and we should leave, now. Before he could answer, the whistle came again. It sounded different this time. It wasn't soft. It was sharp, and it was followed by what sounded like an animalistic growl. I swear to God, I could literally feel something evil all around us, like we were trapped in a bubble with a demon. I begged and pleaded and was very close to just leaving him out there alone. But he wasn't listening. He continued to take a few more steps, and he told me I was being a baby and he wanted to see what was out there. Apparently, he wasn't feeling the evil I was feeling, or he would have turned around on the spot. As he was walking, we heard the whistle again, and then everything fell silent. The whole forest had gone completely still. As we stood there listening, I heard a crack like a large tree branch had been snapped. We both stopped and didn't move. We just stood there in the dark trying to listen, but all I could hear was my own heavy breathing. We began hearing footsteps, and they were very loud and heavy, big and fast, and headed in our direction. It sounded like a train was coming through the woods. I whispered immediately to say that we have to go right now, but it was too late. I saw it before Sam did. It was in the trees just outside of our flashlight beams. I'll never forget the eyes on this creature. They were glowing yellow like cat eyes. Huge. They were the size of golf balls. This thing walked on two legs like a human. It was way bigger than both of us put together. Its arms were so long that its knuckles were nearly dragging the ground. From head to toe, it was covered in black hair, long, shaggy black hair. Its face, though. Is there a Dogman that looks like a chow? If you're unsure of what a chow is, it's a breed of dog with long bushy hair. I encourage you to Google it. This thing's head was huge and its face was identical to one of those dogs. Sam didn't even see it until it moved. This thing moved fast, too. It was right in front of us in a split second, and that's when Sam screamed. I guess it was a Dogman. I don't know what else it could have been. I've never heard of another cryptid that looks like a canine. Whatever it was, I can tell you it was not friendly. We both turned and ran at the same time. We didn't stop for anything. We were tripping and stumbling the whole time, and we could hear it was chasing us. It was definitely keeping pace, but we had gotten a decent head start. We made it back to the campsite, and by the time we got to our fire, it stopped. That's when we came to the conclusion this thing stayed away from the fire, so we started building it up as big as possible while we packed up our stuff. We didn't speak for a long time. We just packed up our gear and grabbed our stuff and left. We didn't even bother with the tent. We just drove straight home, leaving it behind. He refused to even talk about it again after that night, but I'm pretty sure I know exactly what we saw, and I know Sam knows as well. That's why he doesn't want to talk about it. There was definitely a Dogman in those woods that night, and it's something that I never want to see again. If you've encountered one of these creatures, my heart breaks for you, because I know what it did to me, and I've watched what it did to Sam. It is irreversible damage and trauma. The nightmares from seeing one is next level. Please take every precaution you can when outdoors. That's my encounter with a Dogman in the Appalachian Mountains of eastern Kentucky. I appreciate it, brother. Loyal subscriber and listener. Anonymous. First of all, I want to thank both of these individuals for trusting and sharing with me these encounters. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to them as much as I enjoyed narrating them. And a big thanks to all of you that are listening now and have been with me since the creation of this channel. I recognize a lot of you have been here since I had 100 subscribers. God, that only seems like yesterday, and now we are at almost 8,000. I cannot thank you guys enough. That's going to do it for this upload, but I have another one loaded in the chamber and ready to go. That one will be up later on tonight or early tomorrow. And trust me, this next encounter out of Indiana, you don't want to miss it. And a heads up, viewer discretion is advised for the next one. It is very disturbing, and I would not recommend any younger audiences to listen. Before I end this video, I want to ask everyone that's listening, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And if you've already done so, thank you so much. Just a tiny bit of support and just a second of your time can help this channel grow. Well, that's going to do it for this one. Until next time, my friends, watch over your loved ones, keep your head on a swivel, and as always, good night.